We spend a lot of time talking about the amazing things humanity builds. Mega factories, massive infrastructure, new energy facilities. But let's zoom out from the final product for a second and look at the chaos underneath. We're talking about projects with dozens of different companies, millions of components, and 5 or more years of work. How, specifically, does the organization managing it all make absolutely sure that the cooling system from contractor A fits perfectly into the foundation supplied by contractor B? And how do they do that while hitting impossible safety standards and really aggressive deadlines?
Well, you might think it runs on trust or maybe a shared Google Drive, but you'd be fundamentally wrong.
Exactly. It runs on a rigorous, almost bureaucratic discipline that is absolutely essential for stopping systemic failure. Today, we were taking a deep dive into the formal blueprint of accountability known as interface management. The source material for this is a section of an actual employer requirement document, E2.9, which lays out precisely how coordination and cooperation must be performed on a massive, complex project.
And our mission is to understand how these highly detailed, often overlooked systems are set up to ensure all the different elements of the works actually function together. And if you want the single biggest reason why the system needs to be so exhaustive, the source document says it directly. Interfaces are explicitly defined as one of the main risks in the realization of the works. I mean, this isn't just about making things fit, it's about neutralizing one of the only things that can actually sink a multi-billion-dollar project, a communication failure.
Okay, let's unpack that core concept, starting with the definition of an interface itself. Because when I hear that word, I think physical, a pipe, meaning a valve. But that's too narrow here, right?
Oh, it's far too narrow. The formal definition they use is really comprehensive. An interface is a point of interaction or a common boundary between several systems, people, organizations, stakeholders, and the like. So it can be physical, sure, but it's just as likely to be procedural, like the handoff of a safety certificate, or even organizational, who approves the final design change.
So we're dealing with risk that exists in the gaps between contracts, not just the work within them. The document makes it clear that cooperation is a mandatory performance requirement. It's not just a nice-to-have suggestion.
That's the strategic shift. It elevates cooperation from, a soft skill to a measurable engineering requirement. The contractor is required to obtain and make available timely, all relevant information details for all interfaces. If you fail to cooperate, you have failed to perform your contract. Simple as that.
And what defines the framework for proving that performance? What are the key documents that structure it all?
There are 4 key pillars that turn that vague idea into something you can actually audit. First, the original scope documents that define the boundaries. But the active tools are these: the interface register, the regular coordination and interface meetings, the interface query forms, we'll just call them IFQs, and then finally the formal interface status reporting. And these aren't just notes in the margin, they are the required mechanisms for interaction.
That focus on accountability is just relentless. And it's especially clear in one specific rule that really caught my eye. It's this surprising twist about on-site coordination. The source document says that where one contractor's site overlaps with another, that contractor suddenly becomes responsible for the overall site coordination in that area.
Yes, this is where theory meets the messy reality of a construction site. It's a huge shift of liability. If you are the contractor whose boundary overlaps with someone else, you become the de facto site manager for that shared zone. And that management role, it's massive.
What does that actually mean? I mean, what does that responsibility entail? They're not just responsible for their own work, but for everyone else's logistics in that space.
Yeah, exactly. It includes managing health, safety, and environment HSE, which is the highest risk on any site. It also covers logistics, security, and traffic. So imagine a major access road used by 3 different contractors. Instead of the employer coordinating them, one of those contractors becomes the traffic cop, the gate guard, and the safety warden for that specific zone. It's a genius piece of risk transfer, really.
It's incredibly pragmatic. It forces the friction points to be managed at the lowest possible level by the people who are actually there, experiencing it every day.
It is. It's a perfect example of how interface management addresses pure operational risk, not just technical specs. So we've defined the risk in the documentation. Now we need the people responsible for running this whole system.
Right. If the interfaces are the main risk, the response has to be just as aggressive in terms of people, and the requirements are crystal clear.
Absolutely. The contractor's organization must include a dedicated full-time and FTE and experienced interface coordinator, or coordinators, plural. This cannot be a part-time job or, a duty shuffled between managers. It needs a single point of contact.
What's fascinating to me is the requirement for continuity. It says this must be the same person for the whole contract. That must be a nightmare to enforce on a 5 or 6 year project.
It's difficult, but it's necessary. The employer knows that institutional knowledge, knowing who to call, which details matter, is the most valuable asset. Losing your interface coordinator means restarting that whole relationship building process, which is just too risky. And critically, that coordinator must have an adequate mandate.
Okay, let's talk about that adequate mandate. In practice, what does that mean? Does it mean they can make big financial decisions?
Not necessarily financial, but timely and binding operational decisions. Interface issues are usually on the project's critical path. If the coordinator sees that contractor A needs to shift a concrete pour by 48 hours to let contractor B's steel in, they need to be able to make that call without 3 levels of sign-off. If the coordinator is just a messenger, the system fails immediately.
So the coordinator is less a project manager and more an empowered diplomat, focused only on those boundary conditions. And to do that, they need a plan. The Interface Coordination Plan, or PCP.
Yes, the PCP is mandatory. It's a living document, part of the main project execution plan. And what's really remarkable is the timing. The first version has to be issued for review only 2 weeks after the contract is signed.
2 weeks. On these projects, it can take 2 weeks just to set up the coffee machine. That immediately tells you the employer sees coordination as a critical path item from day one.
It frames coordination as the first problem you have to solve. And the PCP isn't just a promise, it's the instruction manual for communication. It details the system for coordination, how documents will be shared on the EDMS, and how all these interface activities get fully integrated into the main project schedule.
That integration part is key. If an interface activity like an inspection or a document handoff isn't tracked like physical work, it just falls off the radar.
That's right. And the whole system is built on the assumption that, despite all this planning, chaos will still happen, new interfaces will emerge.
Managing the unexpected. So if a new non-defined interface pops up, say a new regulation changes a road and affects 3 new parties, who's on the hook for that?
It is entirely the contractor's responsibility. They can't just point and say, that wasn't in my scope. They have to log it, update the interface register immediately, and formally agree on the new roles and responsibilities with the other parties. It forces the unexpected back into the formal structure of accountability right away.
That is just brilliant. Okay, let's move on and look at those formal documents, the actual tools that hold this all together, starting with the ultimate catalog of risk, the interface register, or IR.
The IR is the formal codified master list. And if you look at the template, it just shows you the sheer scope of these projects because it tracks interfaces across every single phase.
It's overwhelming. It covers design process, civil, mechanical, but also procedural interfaces for things like procurement schedules or vendor data, then construction interfaces, all the way through to completion, commissioning, even startup training.
Every single interaction point is cataloged. And the register tracks critical metadata, a unique ID number, a detailed description, document references, and of course, status tracking. Open, closed, and most importantly, a due date. If a connection point isn't in the IR for accountability purposes, it basically doesn't exist.
But the IR is the static inventory of known risks. But when party A needs information from party D to finalize a design, they can't just send a quick email. That's where the interface query form, the IFQ, comes in.
Right. The IFQ is the dedicated documented system for asking for help or demanding information. It forces clarity. The template requires specific fields, the IFQ number, who it's from, who it's to, the subject, and a cross-reference back to the IR ID. It's basically a formalized, auditable help desk ticket for engineering information.
I love that. It eliminates those vague emails and undocumented phone calls. It turns a request into a formal artifact.
Absolutely. And the process for resolution is just as strict. If you get an answer and it raises more questions, the IFQ has to be resubmitted with a higher revision number. So the whole history, the whole negotiation is captured in the audit trail. And all these requests are tracked in their own IFQ register.
What's the enforcement lever there? How do you make sure people respond quickly?
The IFQ register tracks everything, but most tellingly, it tracks the number of days open. That number of days open is not just data. It's a strategic club the employer uses to enforce speed. If one company consistently has IFQs sitting there for 60-plus days, that becomes a huge red flag in the monthly report.
So responsiveness becomes a measurable metric. Yeah. Okay, now let's talk about the third tool, the interface log, or IL. How is that different from the static IR?
The interface log is based on the register, but it's the dynamic live action list. Think of the IR as the library catalog. The IL is the daily agenda. It's updated during the coordination meetings or at least every month. It takes every line from the IR, adds any new items, and tracks the current due date, the specific deliverable, the responsible party, and the status. It turns that huge list into a minute-by-minute action tracker.
So the IR identifies the risk, the IFQ manages the request, and the IL manages the action. This brings us perfectly to the human element and the accountability model.
Before we get to the model, we have to talk about the meetings, because that's where these tools are actually used. The contractor has to host a kickoff meeting within 28 days of the start date.
4 weeks, and then subsequent meetings are frequent, like weekly or biweekly. That pace shows the risk is perpetual.
Right. The whole goal is to manage the IFQs, resolve conflicts, and most importantly, identify new interface items and immediately allocate roles. And the minutes of meeting have to include the updated interface log. It becomes the official record. But the real foundation of who does what lies in the ROSCI model.
Okay, let's spend some time on ROSCI because this is the crucial part that removes all the ambiguity. R stands for responsible.
The responsible party is the one who executes the work. And this is the golden rule, and it's ruthless. Each interface should have only one party identified as responsible. There is no such thing as shared responsibility. In these environments, shared responsibility is just shared blame, and the system refuses to allow that escape route.
That clarity is what keeps things moving. It prevents that passive-aggressive game of waiting for the other person to go first. Okay, then we have O for owner.
The owner is the empowered delegate. This is the focal point. A specific person on the responsible party's team who is authorized to make decisions on that issue. The owner is that single throat to choke. It ensures the responsible party can't claim, well, the decision maker wasn't in the room.
S for support is pretty straightforward. But the next two, consult and inform, that's where things usually break down.
They have to be rigorously defined here. Consult is the party who must be consulted before you do something. This is mandatory two-way communication. You ask them, they provide input, you document it.
Give us a quick analogy for that.
Okay, consult is like asking the structural engineer if your new massive generator is going to make the roof collapse. Their input directly affects what you do. You cannot proceed without it.
Perfect. And inform.
Inform is the party who just needs to be notified. This is strictly one-way communication. Think of it as sending a project update to a government authority. They need to know the status, but they aren't required to provide input that changes your course of action.
That distinction is the secret sauce. You consult the few who can actually derail your work, and you inform everyone else.
Exactly. And this whole granular structure feeds right back into the mandatory monthly reporting. Contractors can't hide problems. They have to specifically list out their top 10 critical interface issues in their progress report with status and corrective actions.
Which means the employer isn't searching for problems in a 300-page report. The contractor has to serve up their biggest failures right at the front, plus all the updated registers and logs. It's a system built on total transparency.
If you step back and look at this entire structure, the message is blunt. The soft skill of cooperation is now a hardened, standardized, auditable engineering discipline. The system isn't designed to trust you, it's designed to track you.
Absolutely. For anyone trying to grasp this, I think the biggest takeaway is that interface management turns the vague idea of cooperation into a formal, auditable process. It uses dedicated people, that FTE coordinator and specific tools, the IR, IFQ, and IL, to kill the massive risk that comes with complexity.
And you realize that success on these projects isn't really defined by having the best individual engineers, but by having the clearest system of communication and accountability. The entire structure, especially ROSCI, is designed to prevent ambiguity and ensure that for every single interaction, one party is always unambiguously responsible.
And that leads to a final thought for you to chew on before we wrap up. These documents are designed to handle risk from a failure to act. But what happens when parties involved intentionally resist defining their single responsible role? And when you look at those top 10 critical interface issues that come up every month, how many of those do you think stem not from technical failures, but from a failure to correctly define whether another party should have been consulted versus merely informed?
Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and see next time.